Adrian Romano slammed $20,000 onto the counter, and Claire Bennett slid it right back into his chest pocket without even looking up. "Take your money and get out of my diner." Nobody had said those words to him in 15 years. Nobody had dared. He was the man half of New York crossed the street to avoid the man whose name alone emptied rooms, and this exhausted waitress with blood on her apron had just rejected more cash than most people saw in a lifetime twice, like it meant nothing at all. Something inside Adrian Romano quietly, permanently broke. Comment the city you're watching from tonight and subscribe if you believe love should never come with a price tag. Rain hit the windows of Benny's diner like something angry, like the sky itself had a grudge against Brooklyn that night. Claire Bennett wiped down the same section of counter for the third time, not because it was dirty, but because her hands needed something to do besides shake. The diner was almost empty. 10:40 at night on a Tuesday, and the only customers left were an old man nursing decaf in the corner booth and two teenagers splitting a plate of fries they couldn't really afford. Claire knew that feeling. She knew it better than anyone. "Claire, honey, go home," said Rosa, the diner's 63-year-old owner, wiping grease off her hands with a rag that had seen better decades. "You've been here since 6 this morning." "I'm fine, Rosa. You're gray in the face." "I said I'm fine." Rosa didn't push. She never did anymore. Ever since Claire's father died 8 months ago and left behind a mountain of hospital bills and a second mortgage nobody knew existed, Claire had stopped accepting help the way other people stopped accepting phone calls from numbers they didn't recognize. Politely, firmly, every single time. "Your father would kill me if he knew I let you work doubles," Rosa muttered. "My father's not here to stop you," Claire said, and the words came out sharper than she meant them to. She softened immediately. "Sorry, I'm just tired." "I know, baby, I know." The bell above the door jingled. Both women turned automatically the way you do after years of shift work, the small reflex of hoping it's a good tip and not a headache. It was neither. It was a scream, not from inside the diner, from the street. A woman's voice, high and panicked, cutting through the sound of rain. Then a sound Claire's body recognized before her brain did. A gunshot. Sharp, close, followed instantly by a second. "Get down!" Rosa yelled, dropping behind the counter on instinct. Claire didn't get down. Later, she would never be able to explain why. Her legs moved toward the door instead of away from it, some old stubborn part of her that refused to just watch when something was happening 2 feet away. Through the rain-streaked glass, she saw chaos. A dark sedan skidded against the curb. 2 men in the street exchanging fire across the hood of a parked car. And in the middle of it, frozen, too terrified to run, a little girl, maybe 7 years old, clutching a soaked stuffed rabbit, standing exactly where the next bullet was going to go. Claire's hand was already on the door. "Claire, no!" Rosa shrieked. She didn't listen. She was 3 steps out into the rain when a man in a long black coat moved faster than anyone she'd ever seen. He came out of nowhere, scooped the child off her feet, and turned his own back toward the gunfire, like it was the most natural thing in the world, like his body was simply built to stand between danger and someone smaller than him. A bullet grazed his shoulder. Claire saw the black coat jerk, saw a dark stain start to spread almost instantly in the rain. The gunfire stopped as fast as it started. Tires screeched. The sedan peeled off into the night, and just like that the street was empty again except for rain. A crying child being handed off to a woman who came running from the corner, and a stranger standing in the middle of the road, holding his shoulder like it was nothing. Claire ran to him without thinking. "You're bleeding. Inside, now." The man looked at her the way you'd look at something that didn't fit into your understanding of the world. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're bleeding through a $2,000 coat. Get inside before you pass out on my sidewalk." Something flickered across his face. Maybe surprise. Maybe the first genuine smile he'd had in a long time, quickly buried. He walked inside without another word. Rosa had already fled to the back the moment she saw the size of the wound, muttering something about needing to call her sister, which everyone understood meant she wanted no part of whatever this was. Claire didn't blame her. She grabbed the first aid kit from under the counter with hands that were finally starting to shake now that the adrenaline was wearing thin. "Sit," she said, nodding at the stool. "I don't take orders well." "Then bleed on my floor. See how that works out for you." He sat. Claire peeled back the ruined fabric of his shirt with a steadiness that surprised even her. The wound was a graze, ugly but shallow, the kind that looks worse than it is if you don't panic. She'd learned enough patching up her father during his last year to know the difference between something that needed a hospital and something that needed pressure and antiseptic. "This needs stitches eventually," she said, cleaning the wound. "But it'll hold for tonight. You've done this before. My dad was sick a long time. You learn things." He watched her work in silence for a moment, and something about the way he studied her, not like a man admiring a woman, but like a man trying to solve an equation he didn't understand, made her uncomfortable in a way she couldn't name. "That was a brave thing you did out there," Claire said, taping the last of the gauze. "Most people would have run. She's 7. He said simply like that explained everything. She didn't do anything to deserve being in the middle of that. Neither did you from the sound of it." He didn't answer that. Instead, he reached into his coat with his good arm and pulled out a thick envelope, setting it on the counter between them like he was closing a business deal. "For your trouble, and your silence." Claire looked at the envelope. Didn't touch it. "How much is in there?" 20,000. She almost laughed. Almost. "For a bandage and some antiseptic? For tonight, never happening." And there it was. The moment that would change both their lives, though neither of them knew it yet. Claire slid the envelope back across the counter with 2 fingers like it was something that might bite her. "I charge $38 for first aid supplies, nothing more, thing. Adrian Romano," though she didn't know his name yet, looked at the envelope, then at her, then at the envelope again, like his brain was trying to process information that didn't compute. "You're refusing $20,000. "I'm refusing your $20,000. "Why?" Claire crossed her arms. "Because I didn't help you for money. I helped you because there was a bleeding man in my diner and a kid almost got shot on my street. That's not something I sell. That's just something I do. Everyone has a price. Not me." "Everyone," he repeated, like he needed it to be true. Claire reached under the counter, pulled out a small receipt pad, and wrote something down. She tore it off and slid it toward him. $38 itemized. Gauze. Antiseptic. Tape. Pay that if it makes you feel better. Keep the rest for someone who actually wants it. He stared at the slip of paper like it was written in a language he'd never encountered before. The old man in the corner booth had long since fled along with the 2 teenagers, everyone deciding that whatever was happening at the counter was above their pay grade to witness. Rosa peeked out from the kitchen, once saw the stranger still sitting there with a bandaged shoulder and an untouched envelope of cash on the counter, and retreated again without a word. "What's your name?" the man asked. "Why do you need it?" "Because I'd like to know who just turned down more money than most people make in a year." "Claire," she said after a pause. "Claire Bennett." "Adrian." "Just Adrian. No last name." Claire noticed that, filed it away, decided not to push. "You should get that shoulder looked at properly tomorrow," she said, already moving to clean up the first aid supplies. "A real doctor, not a diner waitress with a first aid kit. I have people for that." "Of course you do." Something in her tone made him look up sharply, like he'd caught an insult he wasn't sure was intentional. "You don't like me very much," he observed. "I don't know you," Claire said honestly. "I know a man walked into my street, got shot protecting a kid, and then tried to pay me for doing my job as a human being. That's it. That's all the data I have." "And what would you conclude from that data?" Claire considered this question seriously, which surprised him more than anything else that night. "That you're either a very good man who's had to become something else to survive, or a very bad man who's forgotten what good looks like. I genuinely don't know which." For a long moment, Adrian said nothing. Outside, the rain kept falling, drumming against the window, and somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed and faded. The city moving on the way it always did, indifferent to whatever small strange thing was happening in this particular diner. "That's the most honest thing anyone has said to me in years," he finally said. "Must be a sad life." "You have no idea," Claire almost asked. Almost let curiosity win over caution. But something told her that whatever answer he might give wasn't one she wanted, not at nearly 11 at night with a stranger's blood on a towel in her hand and $20,000 still sitting untouched on the counter. "You should go home, Adrian. Wherever that is. Get that shoulder looked at by someone who actually went to medical school." He stood slowly, testing the shoulder, wincing slightly. He picked up the envelope. She thought for a second he was finally going to leave it, but instead, he tucked it back into his coat. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out 2 crisp $20 bills, and laid them on the counter. $38, he said, plus a decent tip, since apparently that's the only currency you accept. Claire almost smiled. Almost. "Keep the rest for the next person who needs it more than I do." He looked at her for a long moment, like he was trying to memorize something. Then he turned and walked out into the rain without another word, leaving nothing behind but 2 $20 bills and a question mark that would follow both of them for a very long time. Claire didn't think about it again until 3 days later, when Rosa came running into the kitchen holding her phone like it was on fire. Claire, you need to see this." "See what?" "That man, the one from the shooting. Do you know who that was?" Claire wiped her hands on her apron, mildly curious despite herself. "No. He never told me his last name." Rosa turned the phone screen toward her. A grainy photo, a news headline in bold red letters. "Local authorities decline to comment on Romano crime family involvement in Tuesday night shooting." Claire's stomach dropped an inch. "Romano. Adrian Romano." Rosa said, her voice dropping like she was afraid saying the name too loud might summon him. "Claire, that man runs half the ports on this coast. People don't cross him. People don't even look at him wrong. And you—" Rosa pointed at her like she was accusing her of a crime. "You gave him a receipt." "I didn't know who he was." "Would it have mattered?" Claire thought about that honestly for a moment. "No," she admitted. "Probably not." Rosa dropped into a chair like her legs had given out. "Claire Bennett, you turned down $20,000 from the most dangerous man in New York." "I gave him a bandage. That's not worth $20,000. Honey, in his world, everything has a price. You just told him something didn't. Do you understand what that means to a man like that?" Claire didn't. Not yet. But she would. He came back 4 days later. It was quieter this time, a Thursday afternoon, the lunch rush winding down, mostly regulars scattered around the diner, nursing coffee and pie. Claire was refilling ketchup bottles behind the counter when the bell rang, and she looked up to see Adrian Romano walk in like he owned the place, wearing a coat that probably cost more than her father's entire funeral. No bodyguards this time. Just him. "You're supposed to call ahead if you're planning to get shot at again," Claire said, not missing a beat. "I like to prepare mentally." "I'm not here to get shot." Bold claim for a man in your line of work. Something flickered across his face. Surprise maybe that she knew now that the pretense was gone. "You looked me up." "Rosa looked you up. I got the highlights." "And you're still talking to me." Claire shrugged, setting a ketchup bottle down with a little more force than necessary. "You want coffee or not?" He sat at the counter, same stool as before, and something about the deliberate normalcy of it. The most feared man in New York perched on a cracked vinyl stool, waiting for diner coffee, struck Claire as almost funny. "Black," he said. "No sugar." "Didn't peg you for sweet anyway." She poured the coffee, set it in front of him, and went back to her ketchup bottles like he was any other customer. That more than anything seemed to unsettle him. He was used to people either fawning over him or fearing him. Claire did neither. She simply existed in his presence like he wasn't remarkable at all. "How's the shoulder?" she asked after a minute. "Healing." "Good. Try not to get shot in my vicinity again. Bad for business." Is that what I am to you? Bad for business? Claire looked at him properly for the first time that visit. There was something exhausted behind his eyes, something that didn't match the reputation Rosa had described in hushed, frightened tones. I don't know what you are, Adrian. I told you that already. You still haven't figured it out. I've been busy. Some of us work for a living. That landed harder than she intended. She saw it land a small flinch, quickly smoothed over the kind of reaction a man trained not to show weakness still couldn't fully suppress. I work, he said quietly. I'm sure you do. You don't approve. Claire set down the ketchup bottle and looked at him directly. I don't know enough about your life to approve or disapprove of anything, Adrian. I know you saved a kid. I know half this city is apparently terrified of your name. I know you tried to buy my silence for a bandage. Those are three very different facts, and I haven't figured out yet how they fit together. He drank his coffee in silence for a long moment. Neither have I, he finally admitted. Some days. He started coming every few days after that, never with warning, never with an entourage, always ordering the same black coffee, and eventually the soup. Rosa's homemade vegetable soup that cost $4.50 and was, by his own quiet admission one afternoon, better than anything his private chef had ever made him. You have a private chef and you're eating $4 soup, Claire said, refilling his coffee without being asked. The chef makes things that are supposed to impress people. This just tastes like something a mother would make. Something in his voice made Claire pause. You don't talk about your family much. There's not much to talk about. That's usually code for there's a lot to talk about. He almost smiled. Almost. You're very perceptive for someone who spends her life refilling ketchup bottles. I contain multitudes, Adrian. She watched him during those visits more than she probably should have. Watched him deal quietly, patiently with the same difficult customers she dealt with every day. A homeless veteran who came in sometimes just to sit in the warmth. Adrian never said a word to the man directly, but Claire noticed his tab always seemed to already be paid whenever he ordered anything discreetly through Rosa. No fanfare, no need for gratitude. An exhausted single mother juggling 3 kids and a diaper bag who dropped her wallet in a rush. Adrian picked it up before anyone else even noticed it fell, handed it back without comment, and went back to his coffee like nothing happened. He wasn't performing kindness. That was the thing that confused Claire the most. He wasn't doing it to be seen. He seemed almost embarrassed when she caught him at it. You're not what Rosa's articles say you are, Claire said one evening when the diner was nearly empty and the light outside had gone soft and orange. People are rarely just one thing, Adrian said. That's very philosophical for a man who apparently controls a shipping empire built on things I don't want to think about. You could ask me directly about the things you don't want to think about. Claire considered it, then shook her head. No, I don't think I want to know. Not because I'm scared, because I think if I know the details, I'll have to decide what to do with them. And right now, I'd rather just watch you eat soup and pretend the rest doesn't exist. That's not sustainable, you know, he said quietly. Pretending. No, Claire agreed. It's not. The trouble started the way trouble always seemed to start in Claire's life lately, quietly then all at once. It was a Tuesday morning when a man in a cheap gray suit walked into the diner, sat down across from Claire at the counter without being invited, and slid a folder toward her like he was serving a subpoena. Claire Bennett. Who's asking? Marcus Doyle. I represent the holder of your father's second mortgage note. He said it like reciting a script, bored and mechanical. You're 4 months behind. We've sent letters. Claire's stomach turned to ice. I've been making payments. Partial payments. That's not the same thing. He tapped the folder. You have 30 days to bring the account current, or the holder will pursue foreclosure on the property associated with this note. The property is my apartment, where I live. That's not really my department, ma'am. Claire's hands had gone cold around her coffee mug. 8 months of double shifts of skipping meals so she could make payments of telling herself she just needed a little more time, and it still wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. How much do I need? Doyle checked the folder. $18,412 by the end of the month. He left the folder on the counter and walked out, leaving Claire staring at a number that might as well have been 18 million for how impossible it felt. She didn't notice Adrian sitting 3 stools down until he spoke. How long has this been happening? Claire startled, quickly closing the folder like it was something shameful. It's not your business. Claire, I said it's not your business, Adrian. Her voice cracked slightly on his name the first time she'd let anything crack in front of him. I've handled worse. I'll handle this. You don't have to handle it alone. Yes, I do. She stood up so fast her stool nearly tipped over. That's exactly what I have to do. Because the second I let someone else handle my problems, they stop being mine to fix, and I stop being someone who fixes things. Do you understand that? Do you understand what it's like to have nothing left except the fact that you handle your own life? The diner had gone quiet. A few regulars pretended very hard to be interested in their food. Adrian's voice when he answered was low and careful, like a man diffusing something he didn't fully understand the mechanism of. I understand more than you think. I doubt that. I built an empire out of having nothing, Claire. I know exactly what it feels like to need help and refuse it, because accepting it feels like losing the only thing you have left. That stopped her. For just a second, something in his voice reached past her anger and touched something rawer underneath it. Then you understand why I can't take your money, she said, quieter now. I do. He paused. That doesn't mean I like watching you drown. I'm not drowning. You are. You're just very good at holding your breath. That night after closing, Claire sat alone in the diner counting the register twice, then a third time, as if the numbers might change if she looked hard enough. They didn't. Rosa found her there at midnight, staring at a legal pad covered in math that didn't add up no matter how she arranged it. You should have told me things were this bad, Rosa said softly, sitting beside her. I didn't want you to worry. I'm 63 years old, Claire. Worrying is basically my full-time job at this point. Rosa put a wrinkled hand over Claire's. Let me help. I have some savings. No. Claire pulled her hand back gently but firmly. Absolutely not. I'm not taking your retirement money, Rosa. Then what? You'll lose your apartment. Claire didn't answer because she didn't have an answer, and the silence sat between them heavier than anything either of them wanted to say out loud. 2 days later, Claire got a call from her landlord's office, informing her almost cheerfully that her outstanding balance had been paid in full effective immediately by an anonymous party. Her hands shook as she hung up the phone. She knew exactly who it was. She grabbed her coat before her shift even ended, ignoring Rosa's confused questions, and drove, took 2 buses, because she'd sold her car months ago, across the city to an address she'd found through nothing more than sheer stubborn determination, and one very useful conversation with a regular customer who happened to work in commercial real estate and recognized the Romano name on a building downtown. The lobby of Adrian Romano's building looked like something out of a magazine Claire had never been able to afford to even flip through. Marble floors. A security desk manned by 2 men who looked like they could bench press the front doors. She marched past both of them with a fury that apparently read as authority because neither one stopped her until she was already in the elevator, jabbing the button for the top floor. Adrian's assistant tried to stop her outside his office. Claire didn't slow down. She threw open his office door so hard it cracked against the wall and slapped a folder onto his desk, the same folder Doyle had left now clipped together with a printout of her landlord's paid-in-full notice. I didn't ask you to save me. Adrian looked up from his desk, slowly, entirely unbothered by the interruption, like he'd been expecting exactly this. I simply removed a problem. You removed my right to solve it myself. Claire. No. Her voice shook with something that was equal parts fury and something else she wasn't ready to name. Do you understand what it took for me to hold on to that apartment on my own? Every double shift, every meal I skipped every time I said no to something I wanted, so I could put that money toward keeping a roof over my head that was mine, Adrian. Something I did. And you just erased it. Like it never mattered. I didn't do it to erase anything. Then why did you do it? Because I couldn't watch you lose everything your father worked for over a number that means nothing to me and everything to you. His voice had lost its usual calm, something raw bleeding through. Was I supposed to just sit there and do nothing? Yes, Claire's voice cracked. That's exactly what you were supposed to do because it wasn't yours to fix. She grabbed the paid-in-full notice off his desk and tore it in half. Then in half again, letting the pieces fall onto the polished wood like confetti at a funeral. I will find another way, she said, quieter now, but no less fierce. I always find another way. That's who I am, Adrian. Don't take that away from me because it makes you feel better about your own life. She turned and walked out, leaving him standing behind his desk, staring at the torn pieces of paper scattered across the surface like something had just been destroyed that he didn't fully understand the value of until it was gone. For the second time in his life, someone had rejected everything his money represented. And for the second time, something inside Adrian Romano quietly, irrevocably broke a little further. He didn't come to the diner for 11 days after that. Claire told herself she didn't notice. She told herself the empty stool at the counter meant nothing, that the absence of black coffee and quiet company on slow afternoons was simply the natural order of things returning to normal. She told herself a lot of things during those 11 days, and none of them were entirely true. On the 12th day, Rosa found Claire staring out the rain-streaked window during a lull in the lunch rush, and said without looking up from the register, "He's not coming back, you know. Men like that don't take rejection well. Twice now." "I don't care if he comes back," Claire said. "I don't, Rosa. Never said you did, honey." Rosa smiled to herself and went back to counting the till, and Claire went back to staring out the window at a street that suddenly felt much emptier than it used to. What Claire didn't know, what she wouldn't find out until much later, was that 3 blocks away, in a car parked outside a building he owned, Adrian Romano was sitting perfectly still, staring at nothing, doing something he hadn't done in 15 years. He was trying to figure out why a diner waitress, with nothing to her name, had more power over him than every rival, every threat, every enemy he'd spent his entire adult life learning to destroy. Money had never failed him before. Fear had never failed him before. But this quiet, stubborn woman who wanted nothing from him, except to be left alone to fight her own battles. This was something his empire had never prepared him for. For the first time in 15 years, Adrian Romano didn't know what to do next. And somewhere inside him, underneath 15 years of armor built brick by brick out of violence and control, something had finally completely stopped listening to the only currency he'd ever trusted. His control, his money, his power. None of it had ever failed him. Until her. The 12th day became the 13th, and the 13th became the 14th, and Claire kept telling herself she wasn't counting. She was counting. On the 15th day, she was elbow-deep in dish suds when Rosa's voice cut through the kitchen door. "Claire, come look at this. If it's another article about him, I don't want to see it." "It's not an article." Rosa's voice had an edge to it that made Claire dry her hands and walk out anyway. Rosa was standing at the front window, staring out at the street where a construction crew had erected scaffolding overnight around the empty storefront 2 doors down, the one that had sat vacant for 3 years since the old hardware store closed. "They started this morning," Rosa said. "No permits posted, no notice, just showed up with trucks. So somebody finally bought the building. Claire?" Rosa turned to her, and there was something almost frightened in her expression. "I asked one of the workers what they're building. You know what he told me." "What?" "A restaurant supply distributor. Coming in 6 weeks. Guess who's going to need a bigger kitchen supplier once this place gets renovated?" Claire's stomach dropped an inch. Rosa, what are you saying? I'm saying somebody with a lot of money is quietly setting up everything this diner is going to need before we even ask for it. New supplier. And yesterday the health inspector came by unannounced, did a full walkthrough, and left without writing us up for the cracked tile in the back that's been a code violation for 2 years. That's a coincidence. That's not a coincidence, honey. That's a man clearing a path so quiet you're not supposed to notice he built it. Claire's jaw tightened. He promised. Promised what? That he wouldn't do this again. Did he actually promise that? Or did you just assume he understood you the last time you screamed at him in his office? Claire didn't have an answer for that, and the not having of it bothered her more than she wanted to admit. She found him that same afternoon. Not by going to his office again, she wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of a second dramatic entrance, but by waiting. She knew somehow, with a certainty, she couldn't explain that he would come. Men like Adrian Romano didn't quietly fix things and then stay away forever, not when the fixing was really about her. He walked in at 4:15, and the moment the bell rang, Claire was already moving toward him, coffee pot forgotten on the burner. A restaurant supply company, she said before he'd even taken off his coat. 2 doors down. Funny thing to just appear overnight. Adrian's face didn't change, which told her everything. I don't control every business that opens on this block. Adrian, it's a coincidence. You're a terrible liar for a man who's supposedly built an empire on lying. Something flickered, not guilt exactly, more like a man recalculating a strategy that had just failed. It's not charity, Claire. It's business. Diners need suppliers. I have interests in food distribution. It's a natural... Stop. Claire's voice was quiet, but it cut through the diner like a blade. A couple at a nearby booth glanced up, then quickly looked away. Stop explaining it like it's a spreadsheet. You did this because of what happened in your office. Because I tore up that paper and walked away and it bothered you so much you couldn't just leave it alone. Would you rather I did nothing? I'd rather you understood why it matters that you did nothing. Claire pressed her palms flat against the counter, grounding herself. Adrian, I am not a problem waiting to be solved. I am not a puzzle you fix so you can feel better about yourself. Every single time you swoop in and erase something hard in my life, you take something from me that I can't get back. What am I taking, Claire? Tell me, because from where I'm standing, all I see is someone drowning who refuses a rope because she'd rather prove she can swim. The words landed harder than either of them expected. Claire felt heat rise in her face, not entirely from anger. Maybe I would rather drown a little, she said, quieter now. Maybe drowning on my own terms means something to me that you'll never understand because you've never had to. You've had money your whole adult life. You don't know what it's like to have nothing except the fact that you did it yourself. Adrian was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its edge entirely. You're wrong about that, he said. But I don't expect you to believe me. Then tell me. Actually, tell me instead of hiding behind 2-word non-answers every time I ask something real. He looked at her for a long time, like he was deciding something important, weighing years of silence against whatever was happening to him now that made silence feel unbearable for the first time. Not here, he finally said. Then where? Come with me, 1 hour. If you don't like what you hear, you never have to see me again. Claire glanced at Rosa, who was pretending very hard to organize napkin dispensers while listening to every single word. Rosa caught her eye and gave the smallest possible nod. Go. 1 hour, Claire said. And if it's another envelope of cash, I swear to God, Adrian. It's not money, he said. I promise you that much. He took her to a building in a part of the city Claire had never had reason to visit. Old brick narrow streets, the kind of neighborhood that had been rough 20 years ago and was slowly, awkwardly becoming something else. He didn't take her inside a mansion or an office. He took her to a small apartment above a shuttered laundromat, unlocked the door himself, and stepped back to let her walk in first. The apartment was small, modest, a single bed, a kitchen table with two mismatched chairs. Peeling wallpaper someone had clearly tried unsuccessfully to patch decades ago. "What is this place?" Claire asked. "Where I grew up." Adrian stood in the doorway like he wasn't sure he had the right to fully enter. "My mother raised me and my two brothers here after my father left. She worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices at night, sewing during the day. We had exactly this much space for 5 years, and some nights we didn't have heat, and some nights we didn't have dinner, and she never once let us see her cry about it." Claire said nothing. She just listened, sensing this was the first time in a long time he'd said any of this out loud. "When I was 12, Adrian continued, "a man came to collect on a debt my father left behind before he vanished. My mother didn't have the money. The man told her he'd take it out in other ways." His jaw tightened, old anger surfacing in a way that made Claire understand for the first time exactly what kind of world had built this man. "I picked up a kitchen knife, 12 years old. I told him if he touched her, I'd use it. Adrian. He laughed at me. Then he hit me hard enough to break my jaw." Adrian's voice was flat now, reciting facts rather than reliving pain, though Claire could see it cost him something to keep it that way. "My mother never fully forgave herself for that. She died 4 years later, still working 2 jobs, still trying to pay off debts that weren't even hers." "I'm so sorry. I don't want your sympathy, Claire. I want you to understand something." He finally stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I built everything I have so that no one in my family, no one who matters to me, would ever again stand in a room and watch someone helpless because they didn't have money to stop it. That's what money means to me. It's not status. It's not power for its own sake. It's the thing that stands between the people I care about, and men like the one who broke my jaw when I was 12 years old." Claire's throat tightened. "And that's why you keep trying to give it to me?" "Yes. Adrian, I understand that now. I do. But do you understand why it still can't work that way with me?" He shook his head slowly. "Explain it to me. Really explain it. Not like I'm an idiot. Like I'm someone who actually wants to understand." Claire sat down on the edge of the small worn bed, and after a moment he sat in one of the mismatched chairs across from her. "When my father died," she began, "he left me nothing but debt. Debt I didn't even know existed until the letters started arriving. And everyone around me, Rosa, my aunt, even a few of the regulars at the diner, they all wanted to fix it. Give me money. Take over. Handle it for me. And every single time it felt like they were telling me they didn't think I was capable of surviving my own life. That's not what it means. I know that logically. But it's what it feels like, Adrian, every single time. My father spent his whole life proving he could take care of us on his own, even when it nearly killed him. And I think some stubborn, maybe stupid part of me needs to prove I can do the same thing. Not because I don't need help, because I need to know I can survive without it at least once before I let myself lean on anyone." "So you'd rather suffer than let someone help you?" "I'd rather earn my own survival than borrow someone else's." Adrian was quiet for a long moment, processing something that clearly didn't fit easily into the framework he'd built his entire adult life around. "That's the loneliest thing I've ever heard," he finally said. "Maybe," Claire admitted, "but it's mine." They sat in that small apartment for another 20 minutes, talking about nothing important. Her father's old diner stories, his mother's insistence on Sunday dinners, even when there was barely food for one meal, small human things that had nothing to do with mafia empires or foreclosure notices. For 20 minutes, neither of them was who the world thought they were. They were just two people who had survived things that shouldn't have been survivable. Then Adrian's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, and Claire watched something shift in his face instantly. The softness draining out, replaced by something colder, more controlled. "I need to take this," he said. "Go ahead." He stepped into the small kitchen, but the apartment was tiny enough that Claire could still hear fragments. "How many? When?" A pause. "No, absolutely not. I don't care what Salvatore thinks is fair, that territory was never his to claim. Another pause longer this time, his voice dropping to something dangerous and quiet. Tell him, if he touches another one of my drivers, there won't be enough of him left to bury. Claire felt a chill crawl up her spine. This was the Adrian Romano the newspapers wrote about. This was the man Rosa had been terrified of from a single photograph. He ended the call and stood in the kitchen for a moment, visibly resetting himself, before walking back in like nothing had happened. Everything all right? Claire asked carefully. Business, he said. Nothing you need to worry about. That's the second time you've said something like that to me. Nothing to worry about. Adrian, I heard you threaten to kill someone just now. He didn't flinch from the accusation. I threatened to hurt someone who's been hijacking cargo trucks and beating the drivers who resist. Some of those drivers have families, kids waiting for them at home. I protect the people who work for me, Claire, the same way I'd protect you. That's not the same thing, and you know it. Isn't it? You just told me 20 minutes ago that money to me means standing between the people I care about and men who'd hurt them. This is the same principle, just a different kind of protection. There's a difference between protecting someone and running an empire built on fear. Sometimes fear is the only language men like Salvatore understand. Claire stood up, suddenly aware of exactly how much distance remained between the man in this small apartment, telling her about his mother, and the man who ran half the ports on the eastern seaboard. I should go, she said. I have a shift. Claire, I need time to think, Adrian. This isn't simple for me. You showed me something real just now, something that actually helped me understand you. But you also just reminded me exactly who you really are underneath it. I am both those things, Adrian said quietly. I don't get the luxury of being only one. I know, Claire said. That's exactly the problem. The rival syndicate had been watching for 6 weeks before anyone connected to Adrian noticed. Vittorio Salvatore ran the largest crew outside Adrian's territory, and he'd spent the last 2 years quietly resenting the fact that the ports, the warehouses, the clean money laundering routes through legitimate shipping companies, all of it belonged to a man he considered soft. Soft because Adrian didn't kill without reason. Soft because Adrian had rules other men in this business considered relics of a bygone, weaker era. But 6 weeks ago, one of Salvatore's men had followed a diner delivery truck and noticed something interesting. Adrian Romano visiting the same small diner in Brooklyn 3-4 times a week. No bodyguards half the time, no entourage, just him sitting at a counter drinking coffee, watching a woman refill ketchup bottles like she was the only thing in the room worth looking at. Salvatore had laughed when he first heard the report. Then he'd stopped laughing because he understood immediately what he was looking at. Everyone has one weakness. He'd finally found Adrian Romano's. You're sure about this? Salvatore asked his lieutenant, a wiry man named Frank Delgado, who'd been feeding him information for months. Positive, waitress. No money, no family connections, no protection of her own. Romano's been seen there at least 20 times in the last 2 months. Salvatore smiled slowly, the expression of a man who'd just found the crack in an armor everyone else believed was flawless. You don't go after Adrian Romano directly, Salvatore said almost to himself. Man's too careful, too well guarded, too many eyes watching his back. But a waitress in Brooklyn with no protection at all. He shook his head, savoring the thought. That's not a fortress, that's an open door. It started small. A brick through the front window of Benny's diner on a Wednesday night, wrapped in nothing, no note, no explanation. Just glass shattering across the floor at 2 a.m, caught on nothing but a cheap security camera that showed a hooded figure walking away without hurrying. Kids? The responding police officer said, barely glancing at the wreckage. Happens all the time in this neighborhood. You have insurance. Claire wasn't so sure it was kids, but she had no way to prove otherwise, so she swept up the glass, called the insurance company, and told herself it was random. Then, 3 days later, one of the diner's regular suppliers called Rosa to cancel their standing order without explanation. They said they're not comfortable doing business with us anymore, Rosa reported, baffled. 20 years, Claire. 20 years and they just stopped. Did they say why? No, just canceled, cold. Claire felt something uneasy settle in her stomach, but she pushed it down. Told herself it was a coincidence, the same way she'd once told herself the restaurant supply company 2 doors down was just business. Then a waitress who'd worked at the diner for 6 years quit without notice, crying, refusing to explain why, saying only that she was scared and needed to protect her family. Protect them from what? Claire pressed gently. I can't say. Please don't ask me again. That night, walking home alone from a closing shift, Claire noticed a black car idling at the end of her block. It sat there for nearly 10 minutes before pulling away slowly, deliberately, like whoever was inside wanted her to notice exactly how unhurried they were. Her hands shook as she let herself into her apartment, and for the first time in months, she found herself doing something she'd sworn she wouldn't do. She called Adrian. He picked up on the first ring. Claire. Something's wrong. Her voice came out shakier than she wanted. The diner's been vandalized. Suppliers are canceling contracts out of nowhere. A waitress just quit because she's scared, and there was a car outside my apartment tonight that didn't move for 10 minutes. Silence on the other end of the line, but Claire could hear something shift in the quality of it. The particular stillness of a man going from calm to lethal in the space of a single breath. Describe the car, he said, voice flat and controlled in a way that frightened her more than shouting would have. Black, sedan. I didn't get the plate, it was too dark. Stay inside. Lock every door and window. Don't answer for anyone except me. I'm coming. Adrian, what's happening? Someone found out about you, he said, and something in his voice cracked just slightly, just enough for Claire to hear the fury underneath it. Someone found out you matter to me, and they're using you to get to me. Claire, listen to me very carefully. This is not your fault. Do you understand? None of this is because of anything you did. Then whose fault is it? Mine, Adrian said grimly. It's mine because I let myself care about you in a world that punishes exactly that kind of weakness. I'm coming right now. Do not open that door for anyone else. He hung up before she could respond, and Claire sat in her dark apartment, heart pounding, staring at a locked door, and understanding with sudden and total clarity exactly how far outside her depth she had wandered the moment she refused an envelope of cash in a rainstorm 3 months ago. Adrian arrived 20 minutes later with 4 men Claire had never seen before, all of them moving with the quiet, controlled efficiency of people who did this kind of thing professionally and often. He didn't wait for her to open the door. One of the men had it unlocked and checked within seconds, a skill Claire didn't want to think too hard about. Adrian pushed past all of them the moment the door opened, crossing the apartment in 3 strides and pulling Claire into his arms before either of them fully processed the decision. Are you hurt? His voice was rough, unfamiliar, stripped of every ounce of the careful composure she'd come to associate with him. I'm fine, Adrian. Nothing happened. I'm fine. He held her for a moment longer than either of them expected, and Claire felt something in her chest crack open, despite every instinct telling her to stay guarded, to remember exactly how dangerous this closeness was. I should never have let this happen, Adrian said, pulling back just enough to look at her. I knew what visiting you meant. I knew what it would look like to men who've been waiting years for a reason to move against me. And I did it anyway because I couldn't stay away, and now you're paying for my selfishness. You didn't force me to let you visit, Claire said. That was my choice too. It doesn't matter whose choice it was. You didn't choose this life, Claire. I did. And now it's bleeding into yours. One of his men appeared in the doorway. Boss, we found something outside. Adrian's jaw tightened. What? A message, left on the windshield of a car parked across the street. Adrian walked out to look Claire close behind him, despite every instruction to stay back. The note was simple block letters, deliberately anonymous. She's not as protected as you think. Claire felt the blood drain from her face. Adrian read the note twice, his expression going somewhere Claire had never seen it go before, beyond anger into something colder and infinitely more dangerous. Salvatore, he said quietly, almost to himself. Who's Salvatore? Someone who's about to learn exactly how big a mistake he's made. Adrian moved Claire that same night. Not asked, not suggested, simply moved with an authority that left no room for her usual instinct to refuse. She found herself in a secured apartment 3 floors above street-level guards, posted discreetly at both stairwell entrances, windows reinforced in a way that told her this wasn't the first time Adrian had needed to protect someone this way. "I can't just abandon the diner," Claire protested, even as 2 of Adrian's men carried in a bag of her belongings retrieved from her old apartment. "Rosa needs me. I have shifts. The diner will be fine. I've already arranged additional security there discreetly, nothing that will draw attention. You can't just take over my entire life because you're scared, Adrian." "I'm not scared for myself, Claire." His voice was hard. "I've survived worse threats than Vittorio Salvatore for 15 years. I'm terrified for you, because you have no idea what these men are capable of, and I refuse to let you become collateral damage in a war that has nothing to do with you." "It has everything to do with me now. You made sure of that the moment you started visiting my diner." That landed. Claire saw it land, saw the flash of guilt cross his face before he mastered it. "You're right," he said quietly. "And I will fix it." "How by starting a war?" Adrian didn't answer immediately, and the silence told Claire everything she needed to know about what his captains were already preparing, for what conversations were happening in rooms she'd never see about retaliation and blood, and the kind of response this world apparently demanded when someone threatened what belonged to you. "Adrian," she grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. "Whatever you're planning, whatever your instinct is telling you to do right now, I need you to promise me something." "I can't promise you I'll do nothing." "I'm not asking you to do nothing. I'm asking you not to become the very thing that scares me most about you." He looked at her for a long moment, something warring behind his eyes. "I can't promise that either," he finally admitted. "Not yet. Not until I know you're safe." Passa Dio. The following morning, Claire woke to the sound of raised voices in the next room. She crept close enough to the door to hear Adrian speaking with someone. His voice low, controlled, but carrying an edge of barely restrained fury she'd never heard from him before. "Every warehouse on the East Docks, every truck route, I want it doubled up starting tonight." A second voice, older, rougher. "Boss, with respect, if we move this many men into visible positions, Salvatore's going to know we're preparing for something. Maybe that's not the message you want to send yet." "I don't care what message it sends. I want him to know exactly what's coming if he touches one more thing that belongs to me." "And the girl?" A pause. "She stays protected, no exceptions. Anyone who lets something happen to her answers to me personally." Claire's chest tightened at the possessive weight. In those words, "belongs to me," even as fear coiled through her at exactly how close this all felt to spiraling into something neither of them could control. She pushed the door open. Both men turned, the older one clearly a captain of some kind. Gray at the temples, a scar along his jaw, nodded respectfully and excused himself without a word, leaving Claire alone with Adrian in a room suddenly heavy with everything unsaid. "You're planning something," Claire said. "Something bigger than security." "I'm protecting what's mine." "I'm not a possession, Adrian." "That's not what I meant." It's exactly what it sounded like. Claire crossed her arms, refusing to back down, even as exhaustion and fear pulled at the edges of her composure. "I heard you in there. You're preparing for war. Real war. People are going to get hurt, maybe killed because of me." "Not because of you," Adrian said firmly. "Because of a man who decided threatening an innocent woman was an acceptable way to challenge me. That's on him, Claire. Not you. Never you. It doesn't matter whose fault it is philosophically. It matters what happens next. People could die, Adrian, because I helped a stranger clean a bullet wound 3 months ago." Something in Adrian's expression cracked just slightly, the weight of that truth landing somewhere he clearly hadn't fully let himself feel yet. "I don't know how to protect you any other way," he admitted, voice rough. "I've spent my entire life learning exactly one way to keep the people I love safe, and that way has always worked. Until now, when the only person I actually want to protect is standing in front of me, telling me that the way I know how to protect people terrifies her more than the threat itself." Claire's breath caught at the word love spoken so quietly she almost missed it, like it had slipped out before he could stop it. "Adrian." "I know," he said quickly, before she could respond to something neither of them was ready to examine directly. "I know it's too soon. I know this is insane, all of it. The timeline, the danger, everything about this situation is insane. But I need you to understand something. I am not the same man who walked into your diner 3 months ago and tried to buy your silence with an envelope of cash. You did something to me, Claire. Something I don't have a name for yet. And I am not willing to lose that because I was too much of a coward to fight for it." Claire stood frozen, torn between the part of her that wanted to run from every single word he'd just said, and the part of her that had been quietly, secretly hoping to hear something exactly like it for weeks. "I need time," she finally said. "I need to think about all of this, about what it means to care about someone whose world runs on rules I don't understand and don't want to understand." "Take whatever time you need," Adrian said. "But please, Claire, stay somewhere safe while you take it." She nodded slowly, and for a moment neither of them moved, the space between them charged with everything left unsaid. Then Adrian's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his entire body went rigid. "What is it?" Claire asked, fear immediately spiking again. "They hit one of my warehouses," Adrian said, voice gone flat and dangerous in a way that made Claire's stomach drop. "2 of my men are in the hospital. Salvatore just declared open war." The room seemed to tilt slightly under Claire's feet. "Adrian, I have to go." He was already moving, already shifting into the version of himself she'd only glimpsed in fragments. Until now, the man the newspapers wrote about, the man Rosa had been afraid of, the man capable of building an empire out of nothing but fear and violence. "Adrian, wait." Claire caught his arm. "What are you going to do?" He turned back, and for just a moment, the 2 versions of him, the boy who'd picked up a kitchen knife at 12 years old to protect his mother, and the boss, who now commanded an empire built on the lessons that moment had taught him, seemed to collide behind his eyes. "Whatever it takes," he said quietly, "to make sure nobody ever threatens you again." Then he was gone, leaving Claire alone in a fortified apartment 3 floors above the street, listening to the sound of his footsteps fade down the hallway, and understanding with sudden and terrible clarity that whatever happened next would decide not just the fate of 2 rival crime families, but the fate of everything fragile and real that had somehow grown between a diner waitress and the most dangerous man in New York. Outside, the city kept moving indifferent as always, while somewhere across town a war neither of them had asked for was about to begin. Claire didn't sleep that night. She sat by the window of the fortified apartment watching headlights crawl along the street below, counting each one like it might be the last thing she ever counted. Somewhere out there, men were fighting a war that had started with a bandage and a receipt for $38, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was the fuse, not the bystander. Around 3 in the morning, one of Adrian's men, the older one with the scar along his jaw, the one Adrian called Nico, knocked softly on her door. "You should try to rest, Miss Bennett." "How can I rest? Adrian's out there because of me." Nico hesitated, then stepped inside, closing the door partway behind him. "Can I tell you something? Might not be my place." "Please. I've worked for Adrian Romano for 11 years. I watched him take over this territory when he was 26 years old, after his uncle got shot in a car outside a restaurant not 4 blocks from where you work." Nico's voice was rough-weathered by things Claire didn't want to ask about. "In 11 years, I have never once seen that man hesitate before doing whatever needed to be done. Never. Not with rivals, not with traitors, not with men who threatened his territory. That's supposed to comfort me." "I'm not finished." Nico leaned against the doorframe. Tonight, before he left, he stood in that hallway for almost 2 full minutes before he could make himself walk out that door. 2 minutes, Miss Bennett. I have never seen Adrian Romano hesitate for 2 seconds, let alone 2 minutes. Claire's throat tightened. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because whatever's happening between you 2, it's changed him. And I need you to understand that whatever choice he makes tonight out there, it's not going to be the easy choice. It's going to be the choice that lets him still look at you tomorrow without hating what he sees in the mirror." He left before Claire could respond, and she sat with that thought until the sun came up gray and thin through the reinforced windows, bringing no relief with it at all. Adrian arrived at the damaged warehouse 40 minutes after receiving the call, moving through the wreckage with a stillness that unsettled even his own men. Broken glass, overturned crates, blood on the concrete floor where two of his drivers had been beaten before backup arrived. "How bad?" Adrian asked, crouching beside a stretcher where one of the injured men, a father of 3 named Danny Cortez, lay with his face swollen, almost beyond recognition. "Broken orbital bone, 3 ribs, the paramedic reported. He'll live. Other one's worse. Internal bleeding, they're taking him into surgery now." Adrian's jaw tightened. He took Danny's hand gently, the man barely conscious. "You're going to be okay, Danny. Your family's being taken care of. Whatever you need, hospital bills, time off, anything. You have my word." Danny managed a weak nod before the paramedics wheeled him away. Adrian stood slowly, and Nico, who had followed him in, recognized the shift immediately, the transformation from concerned employer to something colder, harder. Something that had built an empire out of exactly this kind of rage, properly channeled. "Talk to me," Adrian said. 4 men. In and out in under 10 minutes. They knew our schedule, boss. Knew exactly when the shift change happens, when security's thinnest. Someone talked. Looks that way. Adrian's eyes swept the warehouse floor, landing on something scrawled in spray paint across a stack of crates that had somehow survived the chaos. "Salvatore sends his regards." "He's not even trying to hide it," Adrian said quietly. "He wants you to know it's him. Wants you angry. Wants you to make a mistake." "I don't make mistakes." "With respect, boss, you almost did last night when you stood in that hallway for 2 minutes deciding whether to walk out the door." Adrian shot him a hard look, but there was no real anger in it. Nico had earned the right to say things others couldn't. "She has nothing to do with this," Adrian said. "She has everything to do with this now. Salvatore made sure of that the second he found out about her." Nico's voice softened slightly. "The question isn't whether she's involved anymore, boss. She already is. The question is what kind of man you're going to be while you protect her." Adrian said nothing for a long moment, staring at the spray-painted message like it was a challenge aimed directly at the center of everything he'd spent his adult life becoming. "Call the captains," he finally said. "All of them. Tonight." The meeting took place in a private room behind a restaurant Adrian owned through 3 layers of shell companies, the kind of place where the wine list cost more than most people's monthly rent, and nobody asked questions about who was really paying for dinner. 6 men sat around the table, each one representing a piece of the empire Adrian had spent 15 years building. All of them expected the same thing when Adrian walked in. They expected him to declare war. "Salvatore hit Warehouse 7 last night." Adrian began, standing at the head of the table. 2 of our men are in the hospital. 1 might not walk again. He's been threatening a civilian connected to me, someone with no protection, no involvement in this business whatsoever. "So we hit back," said Marco, the youngest of the captains, barely 30, hungry for the kind of violence that had made his own reputation. "Hit his warehouses, his shipments, send a message he can't ignore." Several heads nodded around the table. This was the language they understood. This was how it had always worked. "That's what he wants," Adrian said. The room went quiet. "Salvatore wants a war," Adrian continued. "He wants headlines. He wants police attention. He wants chaos that forces both our operations into the open, where the DA's office can finally build a case against either of us. He's not stupid enough to think he can beat me in a straight fight. He's counting on me being angry enough to hand him exactly the war he needs to either destroy me or get me locked away long enough that it doesn't matter." "So what we do?" "Nothing," Marco asked, incredulous. "We do something smarter." Adrian's eyes swept the table. Everyone in this room knows Salvatore's operation runs on three legs: the shipping contracts he's stolen from legitimate businesses through intimidation, the financial laundering he runs through 2 casinos upstate, and the political protection he's bought from at least one city councilman I can name right now. The room's energy shifted curiosity, replacing bloodlust. "We don't touch him with bullets," Adrian said. "We touch him with everything else. I want every illegal contract he's forced through intimidation exposed to the businesses he's terrorizing quietly, so they have grounds to walk away and go to competitors instead. I want his laundering routes frozen through channels that will make it look like federal attention, not us. I want the councilman who's been protecting him to understand that his own indiscretions are about to become very public, unless he pulls every ounce of protection immediately." "That could take months," another captain said. "Then it takes months. Meanwhile, nobody else gets hurt. No more headlines, no more heat. And when it's finished, Salvatore won't have an empire left to defend, and he'll have no one left to blame but himself, because he'll never even see our fingerprints on any of it." Marco leaned back unconvinced. "And if he doesn't wait months, if he comes at us again before we finish, what then?" Adrian's expression hardened into something ancient and immovable. "Then I handle him personally," Adrian said. "But that is my decision to make, and mine alone, when and if that moment comes. Until then, nobody moves without my direct order. Anyone who breaks that rule answers to me. Are we clear?" One by one the captains nodded, though Claire would later learn that not everyone in that room agreed with the decision, and that disagreement would carry consequences neither Adrian nor Claire could yet imagine. 3 days passed in a kind of suspended tension Claire had never experienced before. She wasn't allowed to return to the diner. Though Adrian's people relayed updates constantly, Rosa was safe. Business was slow but steady. The vandalized window had been repaired. Claire spent the days pacing the apartment, unable to focus on anything, jumping at every sound in the hallway. Adrian visited when he could always, briefly always, with the weight of something unspoken hanging behind his eyes. "You're not telling me everything," Claire said on the third evening, watching him pace the small living room like a caged animal. "There are things you're safer not knowing." "That's not an answer, Adrian. That's a wall." He stopped pacing, running a hand through his hair, something Claire had never seen him do, the composed, controlled Adrian Romano showing a crack of genuine exhaustion. "I'm trying to end this without more people getting hurt," he said. "It's slower than my instincts want. Every single day, I have to actively choose not to do what 15 years of training tells me is the fastest solution." "And what is the fastest solution?" "You don't want to know." I asked. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. "The fastest solution is finding Vittorio Salvatore and ending this the way this business has always ended things like this. Permanently, without trials, without headlines, without anyone left to retaliate." Claire felt a chill move through her. "And you haven't done that because you looked at me 3 months ago and asked me whether I was a good man, who'd become something else to survive, or a bad man, who'd forgotten what good looks like." Adrian's voice cracked slightly on the words, like they'd been sitting inside him for weeks, waiting to come out. "I don't know which one I am, Claire. I genuinely don't. But for the first time in my adult life, I care which answer is true. And that terrifies me more than Salvatore ever could." Claire crossed the room and took his hand before she could talk herself out of it. "That fear is the good part of you, Adrian. Don't ever mistake it for weakness. It doesn't feel like the good part. It feels like the part that might get me killed, because a man without your restraint would have already ended this and put both of us out of danger. Or a man without my restraint would have started a war that killed a dozen innocent people and put you in prison for the rest of your life." Claire countered. "You're choosing the harder path because it's the right one. That's not weakness, Adrian. I've never seen anything less weak in my entire life." Something in his expression softened just slightly, the exhaustion giving way to something rawer and more vulnerable. "I don't know how to be this version of myself," he admitted quietly. "The one who hesitates, who calculates consequences instead of just eliminating problems." "Maybe you don't have to know how yet," Claire said. "Maybe you just have to keep choosing it one decision at a time until it becomes who you are instead of something you're forcing yourself to be." The financial exposure campaign began working faster than anyone expected. Within a week, two of the businesses Salvatore had been extorting through. Fear quietly switched suppliers, emboldened by anonymous evidence packages that landed on their desks, proving exactly how illegal their previous contracts had been. Within 10 days, one of Salvatore's laundering routes through the upstate casinos collapsed entirely when federal auditors, tipped off through channels Adrian had carefully constructed to look organic, began asking uncomfortable questions. Salvatore's operation, once feared and untouchable, began bleeding money and credibility in ways that made no sense to him, because there was no war to point to, no obvious enemy action, just a slow, methodical unraveling that felt almost supernatural in its precision. "Someone's coming after me," Salvatore told Frank Delgado, pacing his office paranoid and increasingly unstable. "Someone's dismantling everything piece by piece, and I can't even see who's doing it. It has to be Romano." "Then why isn't he coming at me directly? Why isn't he sending a message I can actually fight back against?" Salvatore's frustration boiled over. This isn't how he operates. This is something else. "Maybe the girl changed him," Delgado suggested. "Maybe he's gone soft." Salvatore's eyes lit with something dangerous. "Or maybe," he said slowly, "if the girl is the reason he's holding back, then the girl is exactly how we force his hand." The second attack came without warning on a night Claire would remember for the rest of her life as the moment everything shifted from tension into terror. She'd convinced Adrian against every one of his instincts to let her visit the diner one evening after closing, just to see Rosa, just to feel normal again for even an hour. Adrian sent two of his men with her positioned discreetly outside, and Claire spent nearly 2 hours sitting with Rosa in the back kitchen drinking tea, talking about nothing important, feeling human again for the first time in weeks. She was walking to the car flanked by Adrian's men when the first shot rang out. Everything happened impossibly fast. One of Adrian's guards shoved her hard to the ground behind a parked car, his own body turning toward the gunfire on instinct. Claire heard shouting, more gunfire, the screech of tires somewhere close, her heart hammering so violently she thought it might actually stop. "Stay down," the guard yelled, returning fire toward a dark vehicle speeding past. It was over in less than 15 seconds. The car disappeared around the corner, and silence rushed back into the street with a suddenness that felt almost more terrifying than the gunfire itself. Claire's guard, a young man named Tommy, who couldn't have been older than 25, was breathing hard, checking himself for injuries with shaking hands. "You all right, Miss Bennett?" "I think so." Claire's voice came out unsteady. "Is everyone—" That's when she saw the second guard slumped against the car, blood spreading dark across his shoulder. "Ray's hit!" Tommy shouted immediately, moving to help. Claire's training from months of caring for her father kicked in almost against her will. "Apply pressure, direct pressure right here." She guided Tommy's hands to the wound, her own hands steady despite the terror coursing through her. "Someone call an ambulance, now!" Within minutes, the street was flooded with flashing lights, police paramedics, the kind of chaotic aftermath Claire had hoped never to witness again after that first rainy night 3 months ago. Ray was stable, the bullet having missed anything vital, but the message was unmistakable. Salvatore had escalated. Adrian arrived within 20 minutes and Claire had never seen him move the way he moved through that scene. Barely controlled fury, radiating off him like heat, every step calculated and deadly quiet. He found her sitting on the curb, wrapped in a blanket a paramedic had given her, still shaking. "Claire." He dropped to his knees in front of her, hands framing her face, checking for injuries with an urgency that bordered on desperate. "Are you hurt? Tell me the truth." "I'm fine, Adrian. Ray protected me. He's the one who's hurt." Adrian's jaw clenched so hard Claire heard it. "This ends tonight." "Adrian, no." "Claire, they just opened fire on a public street to get to you. This is no longer about restraint or strategy or being the better man. This is about keeping you alive. And if you retaliate the way you're thinking right now, how many more innocent people end up in the middle of it? How many more Rays get shot? How many more Dannys end up in a hospital? Better them than you. The words hit her like a physical blow, and she saw the moment he realized what he'd said, the horror crossing his own face at the callousness of it. I didn't mean, you did mean it, Claire said quietly. And I understand why. But Adrian, if you become the man who says things like that and means them, you become exactly what you've spent this entire time trying not to become. You become the man from your own nightmare, the one who hurt your mother and didn't care who paid the price. Adrian sat back on his heels, the fury draining out of him, slowly replaced by something that looked almost like grief. I don't know how to protect you without becoming that man, he admitted, voice breaking slightly. I don't know how to keep you safe and stay who you need me to be at the same time. Then find a way, Claire said, taking his hands in hers. Because I refuse to be the reason you lose yourself. I would rather be in danger with the man I've come to know than perfectly safe next to someone who's turned into a monster to protect me. That night, back in the safety of the fortified apartment, Adrian sat alone for hours after Claire had finally fallen asleep, staring at nothing, wrestling with the decision that would define not just this war, but everything he understood about himself. Nico found him there near dawn, still sitting in the same chair. You didn't retaliate, Nico observed. No. Half the men expected you to burn Salvatore's entire operation to the ground tonight. I know. Why didn't you? Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Because somewhere in the last 3 months, I stopped being willing to become whatever it takes to win. And I don't fully understand what that makes me anymore. Weak, maybe, or maybe it makes me the first version of myself I've actually been proud of since I was 12 years old. Nico considered this, then nodded slowly. For what it's worth, boss, I think it's the second one. I hope you're right. Because if I'm wrong, if this restraint gets her killed instead of saving her, I don't think I survive that. Salvatore's paranoia deepened with each passing day, as more of his empire quietly crumbled without a single bullet fired in his direction. He became convinced correctly that Adrian was orchestrating something far more sophisticated than simple retaliation, and the not knowing ate at him in ways violence never had. I want her found, Salvatore told Delgado, pacing his office at 2 a.m, sleep having become a luxury he could no longer afford. The waitress. I want to know exactly where Romano's keeping her. Boss, if we take her, that's not sending a message anymore. That's a declaration of total war. There's no coming back from that. There's no coming back from bankruptcy either, Salvatore snapped. Romano is dismantling everything I've built piece by piece, and I still don't fully understand how. If I have her, he stops. He has to stop. She's his weakness, Frank. Every man has one, and I finally found his. And if he doesn't stop, if he comes after you with everything he's been holding back. Salvatore smiled a cold, humorless expression. Then at least he comes at me directly where I can fight him, instead of whatever ghost he's been using to bleed me dry from the shadows. The information about Salvatore's plan reached Adrian through an unexpected source. A low-level member of Salvatore's crew who'd grown disillusioned watching his boss spiral into increasingly reckless decisions. Someone who reached out through an intermediary purely out of self-preservation, wanting to be on the right side of whatever was coming. They're planning to take her. Nico reported finding Adrian in his office at nearly midnight. Salvatore's given the order. They're watching the apartment right now, waiting for an opportunity. Every trace of color drained from Adrian's face. When? Could be tonight, could be tomorrow. Our informant says Salvatore's desperate enough to move fast. Adrian was already moving, grabbing his coat, his mind racing through contingencies faster than he could fully process them. Get every available man to that apartment now, he ordered. I want a perimeter nobody can breach. And Nico, boss, if anything happens to her because we didn't move fast enough, none of this restraint matters anymore. Do you understand me? None of it. Nico nodded grimly, already relaying orders through his radio as they moved. Claire woke to the sound of raised voices and hurried footsteps in the hallway, outside her door, adrenaline spiking before she even fully understood what was happening. She threw on a robe and opened the door to find the apartment suddenly full of Adrian's men, moving with an urgency she hadn't seen since the night of the shooting. "What's happening?" she demanded, catching Nico's arm as he passed. "We need to move you, right now." "Move me where?" "Somewhere Salvatore doesn't know about. He's planning to take you, Miss Bennett, tonight possibly. We can't take that risk." Claire's blood ran cold. "Take me? Like kidnap me?" "Yes." Adrian appeared in the doorway, then his face a mask of controlled terror that Claire had never seen on him before, not even during the shooting. "Claire, we need to leave immediately." "Adrian, what's happening?" "Tell me the truth." He crossed the room and gripped her shoulders, his hands trembling slightly, a detail that terrified her more than any raised voice could have. "Salvatore is planning to kidnap you to force my hand. I am not going to let that happen. Do you understand me? I would burn this entire city down before I let that happen." "Adrian, I need you to trust me right now completely without question. Can you do that?" Claire looked into his eyes, saw the raw fear underneath the control, and nodded once firmly. "Yes." "Then get dressed. We're leaving in 5 minutes." They moved through the city in a convoy of 3 vehicles. Adrian's men executing evasive maneuvers Claire didn't fully understand, but recognized as the product of careful, practiced planning. She sat beside Adrian in the back seat, his hand gripping hers so tightly it nearly hurt neither of them speaking, as the city blurred past outside the windows. "Where are we going?" Claire finally asked. "Somewhere safe. Somewhere Salvatore has no connections, no informants, nothing." "For how long?" Adrian's silence answered the question more honestly than words could have. "Adrian, I can't just disappear indefinitely. Rosa needs me. The diner. The diner will survive without you for as long as it takes to end this," Adrian said, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "Claire, I need you to understand something. If Salvatore had gotten to you tonight, if we'd been even 10 minutes slower, I don't know what I would have become trying to get you back. And that terrifies me more than anything Salvatore could ever do to me directly." "Then let's end it," Claire said suddenly. "Really end it. Not slowly, not through financial pressure that takes months. Whatever it takes." Adrian looked at her, startled by the shift. "You're the one who's been telling me not to become someone I can't live with. I know, and I still believe that. But Adrian, watching you tonight, watching how scared you were, I understand now that this isn't just about your soul versus my safety. It's about both of us surviving this together, and sometimes surviving requires decisions that aren't perfectly clean." "What are you saying?" Claire took a breath, steadying herself. "I'm saying I trust you to find a way to end this that doesn't turn you into your worst nightmare. But I'm also saying I understand now why you might have to go further than either of us wanted. And if that's what it takes to keep both of us alive, I won't blame you for it." Adrian stared at her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes. Not relief exactly, but perhaps the lifting of a burden he hadn't realized he'd been carrying alone. "I love you," he said suddenly, the words raw and unguarded in a way nothing he'd said before had been. "I should have said it before now. I should have said it the night you tore up that paper in my office, because that's the exact moment I knew with total certainty that I would burn my entire empire to the ground before I let anything happen to you." Claire's breath caught tears rising unexpectedly to her eyes. "Adrian, you don't have to say it back. Not now, not with everything happening around us. I just needed you to know in case tonight goes differently than either of us hopes." "Don't talk like that," Claire said fiercely, gripping his hand tighter. "Don't you dare talk like tonight might be the last chance you get to say it." "I have to be honest with you about the danger we're in, Claire. Salvatore is desperate now, and desperate men do unpredictable things." The car suddenly swerved hard, throwing both of them sideways. Gunfire erupted from somewhere behind them, shattering the rear windshield, and Claire screamed as Adrian threw his body over hers, shielding her instinctively. "Go, go, go!" the driver shouted, flooring the accelerator as the vehicle lurched forward. More gunfire. Claire felt Adrian's body tense above her, heard him grunt in pain. "Adrian!" She screamed terror, overtaking every other emotion. "I'm fine," he gritted out, though his voice was strained in a way that told her otherwise. "Stay down. Stay down. Claire, whatever happens." The car swerved violently through the streets, Adrian's driver executing maneuvers that threw both of them against the doors, gunfire continuing sporadically behind them, until finally the sound faded, replaced by nothing but the roar of the engine and Claire's own ragged breathing. "Adrian, are you hit? Tell me right now." He shifted slightly, and in the dim light from passing street lamps, Claire saw dark red spreading across his side, staining his shirt. Oh God, Adrian. It's not as bad as it looks," he managed, though his voice had gone tight with pain. "We need to keep moving. Can't stop yet. Not safe yet." Claire pressed her hands against the wound, applying pressure, with the same steady instinct that had saved his life the very first night they met 3 months and a lifetime ago. "Stay with me," she said, voice shaking, but fierce. "Do you hear me? Adrian Romano? You do not get to bleed out in the back of this car after everything we've survived. Stay with me." His hand found hers weak, but present, his eyes locked on her face, like she was the only fixed point in a world that had suddenly gone violently unstable. "Never going anywhere," he whispered. "Not while you're still fighting for me." The car sped on into the darkness, carrying 2 people who had started as strangers in a rainstorm and had somehow become each other's only reason to survive the night, racing towards safety that felt for the first time terrifyingly uncertain. The car finally slowed after what felt like an eternity, pulling into an underground garage Claire didn't recognize, and the moment it stopped, 3 men were already pulling the door open, moving Adrian with the practiced urgency of people who had handled this exact kind of emergency before. "Get the doctor, now." Nico's voice cut through the chaos. "I'm fine," Adrian insisted, though his face had gone pale, sweat beading at his temple despite the cool air of the garage. "You're bleeding through your shirt, boss. You're not fine." Claire climbed out after him, refusing to let go of his hand, even as the men tried to guide him toward an elevator. "I'm coming with him." "Miss Bennett, it's safer if—" "I said I'm coming with him." Her voice left no room for argument, and something in her tone made even Nico step back. The private doctor arrived within 15 minutes, a quiet, efficient woman who'd clearly done this kind of work before, no questions asked, no hospital records created. Claire sat in the corner of the room, unable to look away while the doctor cleaned and examined the wound. "You're lucky," the doctor said, working with practiced hands. Bullet passed through soft tissue, missed everything vital by less than an inch. Another inch to the left, and we'd be having a very different conversation. "How long until he's back to normal?" Claire asked. "Depends what normal means for a man like him." The doctor didn't look up. "Physically 2 weeks if he actually rests, which I doubt he will." Adrian managed a weak laugh that turned into a wince. "She knows me well." Once the doctor finished and left, Claire finally allowed herself to sit beside the bed, taking his hand again. Her own hands still slightly trembling from adrenaline that hadn't fully worn off. "You could have died tonight," she said quietly. "I didn't." "That's not the point, Adrian. An inch. The doctor said an inch." Her voice cracked. "I can't keep doing this. Watching you almost die because of me." "Not because of you." Adrian's hand tightened around hers, weak but insistent. "Because of a man who decided violence was the only language worth speaking. Claire, look at me." She met his eyes, tears finally spilling over despite every effort to hold them back. "I told you something in that car," Adrian said softly. "Before the shooting started. I need to know if you heard me, or if fear erased it." "I heard you," Claire whispered. "And—" She leaned down, pressing her forehead gently against his, careful of his injury. "I love you too, Adrian. I've probably loved you since you tried to give me $20,000 for a bandage and looked so genuinely confused when I said no." A real smile broke across his face, the first one Claire had seen in days, that wasn't shadowed by pain or fear. "Best $20,000 I never spent," he murmured. In a sound. Salvatore learned about the failed ambush within hours. and the news sent him into a fury that bordered on unhinged. Sitting in his office as dawn broke over the city, he listened to Delgado's report with a stillness that worried the other man more than any explosion of anger would have. "They got away clean," Delgado reported. "Romano's hit, but not seriously. Our men lost the tail 3 blocks later." 3 blocks. Salvatore's voice was dangerously quiet. "We had them, Frank. We had them, and we lost them in 3 blocks. Boss, we need to think carefully about the next move. This escalation is drawing attention. 2 shootings in 1 week, that's the kind of thing that gets federal eyes on all of us." "You think I don't know that—" Salvatore slammed his hand on the desk. "I have nothing left, Frank. Do you understand that Romano's been picking apart my empire for weeks, and now this failed attempt just handed him every justification he needs to end me completely? I don't have the luxury of caution anymore. So, what's the plan?" Salvatore was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had gone cold and calculating in a way that made even Delgado uneasy. "If I can't take the girl," Salvatore said slowly, "then I make sure Romano understands exactly what it costs to have her. I want every business connection he has that isn't already protected hit. I want his legitimate operations, the ones he's been quietly building to get out of this life. I want those burned to the ground. If he wants to fight a war of exposure and financial pressure, fine. 2 can play that game. Boss, that could take down completely innocent operations, people who have nothing to do with any of this." "I don't care anymore," Salvatore said. And something in the way he said it told Delgado this was no longer a man making strategic decisions. This was a man drowning, grabbing at anything within reach. Adrian recovered faster than the doctor predicted, driven by something that looked less like stubbornness and more like fear of what might happen if he stayed still too long. 3 days after the shooting, against every protest from Claire and his own medical team, he was back at his desk, working through reports with a tension that told her exactly how much was happening beneath the surface. "You should be resting," Claire said, setting a cup of tea beside him that he ignored. "I don't have time to rest." Adrian. Claire Salvatore just torched 2 of my legitimate businesses. Restaurants I spent years quietly building specifically so I'd have somewhere clean to move my money when I finally get out of this life. Burned to the ground. Insurance won't touch it because the investigators already suspect arson connected to organized crime, which means every legitimate partner I have is now terrified to be associated with my name. So he's succeeding at hurting you. He's succeeding at making this messier than it needed to be. Adrian rubbed his temples, exhaustion evident despite his attempts to hide it. "I gave him every chance to walk away from this quietly. I could have ended him weeks ago and chose not to because of what you asked of me. And this is what that restraint has cost." Claire felt something twist painfully in her chest. "Are you saying this is my fault?" "No." Adrian looked up immediately, horror crossing his face at how his words had landed. "No, Claire. God, no. I'm saying I'm exhausted and scared, and watching everything I've built get destroyed, because I'm trying to be a better man than the world I grew up in ever taught me to be." "Then let me help you think," Claire said, pulling a chair beside him. 2 minds instead of 1. "Claire, this isn't your world. You shouldn't have to carry any part of this weight. I stopped being separate from your world the moment Salvatore put a target on my back," Claire said firmly. "I'm already carrying it, Adrian, whether you let me help you think through it or not. So let me actually help instead of sitting in the dark wondering what's happening." Adrian studied her for a long moment, something in his exhausted expression shifting toward reluctant respect. "All right," he finally said. "Tell me what you see." Claire looked through the reports scattered across his desk. Financial records, shipping manifests, surveillance photos of Salvatore's remaining operations. She wasn't a criminal mastermind, but she'd spent years reading people, understanding desperation, recognizing the specific kind of recklessness that came from a person with nothing left to lose. "He's not thinking strategically anymore," she said slowly. "Look at this. Burning your legitimate businesses doesn't actually weaken your criminal operations at all. It just makes things messier, draws more attention. A rational person trying to win a war wouldn't do this. So what does that tell you? It tells me he's not trying to win anymore. He's trying to make sure that if he goes down, he takes as much of you down with him as possible. That's not strategy, Adrian. That's a man who already knows he's lost and is choosing to burn everything rather than accept it. Adrian sat back considering this with new eyes. You think he's given up? I think he's dangerous precisely because he's given up. Desperate men without anything left to protect are the most unpredictable kind, which means the smartest thing you could do right now isn't more pressure. It's giving him a way out that doesn't feel like total defeat. You want me to offer Salvatore mercy after everything he's done. I want you to end this without becoming him, Claire said. There's a difference between mercy and strategy. If you corner a desperate man completely with nothing left to lose, he'll do something catastrophic just to prove he still can. But if you give him an exit, even a humiliating one, most men will take it, because survival matters more than pride once you strip away everything else. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, turning this over. You're suggesting I let him walk away. I'm suggesting you let him choose between walking away with nothing or losing everything, including his life. Most people, when it comes down to it, choose to live. And if he doesn't choose that, if he keeps escalating, then you'll have given him every chance, and whatever happens next will be entirely his choice, not yours. That matters, Adrian, not just legally, to who you are when this is finally over. Yeah. Adrian arranged the meeting through an intermediary. Both sides trusted neutral ground, a warehouse near the docks that belonged to neither organization. Each side allowed exactly 3 men, no weapons visible, though everyone in the room understood exactly how many were concealed, regardless of the agreement. Salvatore arrived, looking worse than Adrian expected, hollow-eyed, unshaven a man, clearly unraveling under the weight of watching everything he'd built crumble in weeks. Come to gloat! Salvatore asked, his voice rough with exhaustion and barely contained fury. Come to end this, Adrian replied evenly. End it how you want me dead, just do it. Save us both the theater. I don't want you dead, Vittorio. Adrian's voice carried a weight that surprised even his own men standing behind him. I want this war to stop before anyone else innocent gets hurt. 2 of my men are in the hospital because of you. Your own people are getting arrested left and right because you've made yourself impossible to ignore. So what, you're offering me a deal? Salvatore laughed bitterly. After everything you want to negotiate, I'm offering you a choice. Walk away from this territory entirely. Take whatever money you have left, whatever's not already frozen or seized, and disappear somewhere far enough that our paths never cross again. In exchange, I stop pursuing every remaining piece of your operation, and you and your people live to see next year. And if I refuse, then I stop showing restraint, Adrian said quietly, and something in his tone made even his own men shift uncomfortably. You've seen what I've done to your operation while actively trying not to destroy you completely. Imagine what happens if I stop holding back. Salvatore's jaw clenched, pride warring visibly with the exhaustion of a man who'd spent weeks watching everything slip through his fingers. Why? Salvatore finally asked. Why offer this at all? This isn't how you handle rivals. Romano, everyone knows your reputation. You don't negotiate, you eliminate. Adrian was quiet for a moment, something passing behind his eyes that Salvatore couldn't quite read. Because someone taught me recently that there's a difference between strength and cruelty, Adrian said. And I'm trying for the first time in my life to remember which one actually matters. Salvatore studied him for a long moment, searching for the trick, the trap, the angle he was certain had to exist somewhere in this offer. Finding none, something in his posture finally broke the fight draining out of him all at once. 24 hours, Salvatore said. I need 24 hours to move my family somewhere safe. You have 48, Adrian said. Don't make me regret this. Claire waited anxiously at the apartment, while Adrian was at the meeting, pacing, checking her phone every few minutes, despite knowing he'd call the moment it was over. When he finally walked through the door, exhaustion evident, but something lighter in his expression than she'd seen in weeks, she felt her whole body sag with relief. "It's done," she asked. He took the deal. 48 hours to disappear, and this war is finally over. Claire crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him carefully, mindful of his healing wound. "You did it. You actually did it without becoming what you were afraid of becoming." "Barely," Adrian admitted, holding her close. "I don't know if I would have found that solution without you sitting there making me actually think instead of just reacting." "You would have, eventually. You're smarter than 15 years of violence trained you to be." "Maybe." He pulled back slightly, looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Claire, I need to tell you something, and I need you to actually hear it, not just as something nice I'm saying in a moment of relief." "Okay, I'm done. With this life, with this business, all of it. I've been thinking about it for weeks now, ever since the night you tore up that paper in my office, and I realized money had stopped being the thing that mattered most to me. This war with Salvatore, watching two of my men end up in hospitals, almost losing you, almost losing myself, trying to protect you the wrong way, I don't want this anymore. I want out." "Adrian, that's not simple. You have an entire empire, obligations, people who depend on you." "I know. It won't happen overnight. But I've already started making arrangements. Legitimate businesses I can transition my captains into managing. A structure that lets me slowly extract myself from the criminal side of things without leaving chaos behind that gets people killed." He took her hands. "I want a life where the only thing I'm protecting is the people I love, not an empire built on fear." Claire felt tears rise unexpectedly, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was describing. "Are you sure this is your entire identity, Adrian? Everything you've built since you were 26 years old?" "I'm sure," Adrian said, with a certainty that left no room for doubt. "For the first time in 15 years, I actually know exactly what I want, and it has nothing to do with power or territory or fear. It has everything to do with waking up every morning next to someone who makes me want to be better than the world raised me to be." Yeah. The weeks that followed felt almost surreal in their normalcy, after months of chaos. Salvatore, true to his word, disappeared entirely, relocating his remaining family somewhere far from the city, and with his departure, the underlying tension that had gripped Claire's entire existence for months finally began to loosen its grip. Claire returned to the diner to Rosa's relieved embrace and the familiar rhythm of double shifts and regular customers, though everything felt different now, colored by everything she'd survived. Adrian visited daily, no longer hiding, no longer pretending their relationship was anything other than exactly what it had become. "The whole neighborhood knows now," Rosa said one afternoon, watching Adrian help clear tables, like it was the most natural thing in the world for a man who ran criminal empires to be doing menial diner work. "Half of them are terrified. The other half think it's the most romantic thing they've ever witnessed." "Which half are you in?" Claire asked, smiling despite herself. "Honestly, depends on the day." Rosa laughed. "But watching him carry dirty plates to the kitchen without complaint, I think I'm leaning toward romantic." Adrian appeared beside them, having overheard the tail end of the conversation. "For the record, I've handled far worse than dirty plates in my life." "I'm sure you have," Rosa said dryly, though there was genuine warmth beneath the sarcasm now. Not everything transitioned smoothly. Word had spread through certain circles that Adrian Romano was quietly extracting himself from organized crime, and while most of his territory respected his authority enough not to challenge the decision directly, there were whispers, concerns from captains worried about their own futures, once the structure they'd built their lives around began to dissolve. Marco, the young captain who'd pushed hardest for war against Salvatore, confronted Adrian directly one evening at the restaurant that served as unofficial headquarters for what remained of the organization. "You're really doing this?" Marco said, disbelief evident in his voice. "Walking away from everything for a woman who works at a diner?" "I'm walking away from a life I no longer want to live, Marco. The woman is part of the reason, but not the whole reason. What happens to the rest of us? You built this. People depend on this structure for their livelihoods." Adrian understood the fear beneath the challenge. Marco wasn't just questioning his loyalty, He was terrified of what came next for men who'd built their entire identities around an organization now dissolving beneath their feet. "I'm not abandoning anyone," Adrian said firmly. "Every legitimate business I'm transitioning into will need managers, employees, people who understand operations. You'll have a place in whatever comes next, Marco, if you want it. I'm not disappearing overnight and leaving chaos behind. This transition will take time done carefully, so nobody gets left behind or exposed to unnecessary risk. And if some of us don't want a legitimate business, if this is the only life we know," Adrian's expression softened slightly, "then I'll help you find your way into whatever life you actually want, even if it's not with me anymore. But I won't build my future on the same foundation that nearly got the woman I love killed, Marco. That part isn't negotiable." Marco studied him for a long moment, something shifting in his expression, not quite acceptance, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. "She really changed you," he finally said. "She showed me who I could have been all along if circumstances had been different," Adrian corrected. "That's not the same as changing me. That's remembering something I'd forgotten." 3 weeks after Salvatore's departure, Claire came home from a long shift to find Adrian waiting in her apartment, her real apartment, the one she'd fought so hard to keep, now finally safe enough to return to with a nervous energy she'd never seen in him before. "You're acting strange," she said, setting down her bag. "Everything okay?" "I need to ask you something, and I need you to actually consider it before you answer, not just react." Claire's heart began to race. "Okay. I've spent my whole adult life building something I thought mattered. Territory, power, money, the things that were supposed to prove I'd overcome where I came from." Adrian took her hands his own, trembling slightly, an unfamiliar vulnerability in a man who'd faced down bullets without flinching. "None of it ever felt like enough until you refused it. Until you showed me that the things I thought made me powerful were actually just things that kept me isolated from anything real." "Adrian, let me finish, please." He took a breath. "I'm not the same man who walked into your diner 8 months ago. I don't know if I'm fully the man I want to become yet, but I know I want to become him with you beside me, not as someone I'm protecting from a distance, but as someone I build an actual life with. Not a life built on fear or money or power, but on something real, something earned." Claire felt tears rising, understanding where this was heading, but needing to hear him say it anyway. "Claire Bennett, I know this timeline is insane. I know we've only known each other 8 months, and half of that time involved gunfire and hospital visits, and a level of chaos most couples never experience in a lifetime together. But I also know with a certainty I've never felt about anything else in my entire life that I want to spend whatever years I have left earning the kind of love you've shown me, instead of trying to buy something that was never for sale to begin with." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box, and Claire's breath caught entirely. "I'm not asking you to marry a mafia boss," Adrian said softly. "That man is disappearing piece by piece every single day. I'm asking you to marry whoever I become instead, even if I don't fully know yet who that is. I just know I want to find out with you." Claire stared at the ring, then at his face, seeing in his eyes the same rawness she'd glimpsed the very first night he sat bleeding in her diner, refusing to fully let his guard down even while wounded. "Yes," she whispered, before he'd even finished asking the actual question, tears spilling freely now. "Yes, Adrian. Whatever you become, whoever you're still figuring out how to be, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger with hands that shook slightly, and Claire pulled him into an embrace that held 8 months of terror and hope and impossible stubborn love, both of them laughing through tears at the absurdity and beauty of everything that had led them to this exact moment. "Just so we're clear," Claire said, pulling back slightly, wiping her eyes, "I'm still not accepting your money for anything, ever. This ring is the last extravagant thing I'm allowing." Adrian laughed, the sound genuine and unguarded in a way that transformed his entire face. "I wouldn't dream of trying anything else. You've made your position on that extremely clear over the last 8 months. Good. As long as we understand each other. Claire." His voice turned serious again, though warmth remained underneath it. Thank you. For seeing something in me worth saving back when I didn't even know there was anything left to save. Claire reached up, cupping his face gently. There was always something there, Adrian. You just needed someone stubborn enough to refuse everything, except the part of you that actually mattered. Outside the window, the city continued its endless rhythm, indifferent as always to the small miracles happening within its borders. While inside a modest apartment in Brooklyn, two people who had started as strangers in a rainstorm now stood together, finally choosing a future neither of them could have imagined. 8 months earlier, when an envelope of $20,000 had first been quietly, firmly refused. The engagement lasted exactly 11 days before the first real test of what their new life would actually require arrived, and it came from a direction neither of them expected. Claire was restocking the diner's pastry case when her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. She almost let it go to voicemail, but something made her answer. Claire Bennett, speaking. My name is Detective Marissa Chen, NYPD Organized Crime Division. I'd like to ask you a few questions about your relationship with Adrian Romano. Claire's stomach dropped straight through the floor. Is this really necessary over the phone? I can come to you if that's more comfortable, or you can come to the precinct. Your choice, Miss Bennett. But we will be talking one way or another. Adrian's face went rigid when Claire told him that evening, exhaustion and fury warring behind his eyes in a way she recognized now, the particular stillness that meant he was calculating threat levels faster than he could speak them out loud. This is standard, he finally said, though his voice lacked full conviction. Law enforcement has been building files on me for over a decade. They question everyone connected to me eventually. Adrian, she used the word relationship, not acquaintance. Not diner owner, relationship. They know about us specifically. Salvatore, Adrian said grimly. Before he disappeared, my guess is he made sure to leave something behind. A parting gift, so to speak, making sure that even in defeat, he could still cause damage. What does that mean for us, for the transition you've been building? Adrian ran a hand through his hair, something Claire had come to recognize as his tell for genuine fear. The same gesture from the night Salvatore had planned to kidnap her. It means we need to be very careful. If they're building a case connected to me and they find out about our engagement, you could be pulled into something much larger than a simple interview. Are you saying I should talk to them or not? I'm saying whatever you do, you need a lawyer present. My lawyer specifically, because he already knows exactly how to protect you within the boundaries of what's actually true. Claire felt a flash of the old frustration rising. Adrian, I'm not going to lie to the police. I'm not asking you to lie. I'm asking you to be smart about how you tell the truth, because there's a significant difference between honesty and giving federal investigators ammunition they'll twist into something neither of us actually did. The interview took place 3 days later in a sterile room that reminded Claire uncomfortably of every crime show she'd ever half-watched while folding laundry, never imagining she'd actually sit in one herself. Adrian's lawyer, a sharp, quiet woman named Patricia Alvarez, sat beside her, having spent the previous evening walking Claire through exactly what to expect. Detective Chen sat across the table, a folder thick with documents in front of her, studying Claire, with an expression that gave away nothing. How long have you known Adrian Romano? Approximately 8 months. And the nature of your relationship? We're engaged. Claire said, simply deciding immediately that hiding the obvious would only make everything worse. Chen's eyebrow lifted slightly, the first genuine reaction she'd shown. Congratulations. That's a fast timeline for a man in his position. My client isn't required to comment on the pace of her personal relationships, Patricia interjected smoothly. Of course. Chen made a note, unbothered. Miss Bennett, are you aware of the nature of Mr. Romano's business activities? I'm aware he's transitioning his business interests into legitimate ventures, Claire said carefully, exactly the phrasing Patricia had coached her through the previous night. That's an interesting way to phrase running a criminal organization. My client has answered the question as posed, Patricia said. If you have a specific legal question, ask it directly. Chen studied Claire for a long moment, then slid a photograph across the table, Grainy taken from a distance, showing Adrian and Claire standing outside the diner months earlier, the night of the first shooting, before either of them fully understood what they were becoming to each other. Do you recognize this photo? Yes. Can you tell me what happened that night? Claire glanced at Patricia, who gave the smallest possible nod. A shooting occurred outside the diner where I work. A man was injured protecting a child. I provided first aid. I didn't know at the time who he was. And you've maintained a relationship with him ever since, despite eventually learning about his criminal activities. My client's personal choices about who to love aren't a crime detective, Patricia said, an edge entering her voice now. Unless you have specific evidence connecting her to criminal activity, this line of questioning is going nowhere productive. Chen leaned back, studying both women. Here's my concern, Miss Bennett. I've spent 3 years building a case against Vittorio Salvatore's organization. 3 days ago, Salvatore's remaining assets were seized in a joint operation, and in the process, we recovered documentation suggesting a coordinated campaign against his operation that predates our own investigation by several months. Documentation that points directly to Mr. Romano. Claire's heart pounded, though she kept her face carefully neutral, exactly as Patricia had coached. I have no knowledge of my client's business dealings, Patricia said firmly. And unless you're prepared to charge her with something specific, this interview is concluded. Chen was quiet for a moment, then closed her folder with a soft, deliberate motion. For what it's worth, Miss Bennett, I've read enough about your history to believe you're not involved in anything criminal. But you should understand something. The man you're marrying has spent 15 years building an empire that hurt a lot of people along the way. Redemption stories make for nice headlines, but they don't erase decades of damage. I hope you've thought carefully about what you're walking into. I have, Claire said quietly. More carefully than you could possibly imagine. The investigation into Adrian intensified over the following weeks. Federal attention now fully engaged following Salvatore's collapse. Every legitimate business Adrian had built, now under scrutiny, every transaction examined for evidence of the criminal enterprise beneath the legal surface. They're going to find something, Adrian admitted one evening, staring at documents spread across his desk with an exhaustion Claire had rarely seen in him. 15 years of activity doesn't disappear just because I've spent the last few months trying to walk away from it. What happens if they do? Prison time potentially significant. Asset forfeiture almost certainly. Everything I've been building for our future could disappear overnight. Claire sat beside him, taking his hand. Then we face that together, whatever it looks like. Claire, I need you to understand something. If I go to prison, you shouldn't wait for me. You deserve a life that isn't defined by visiting hours and appeal processes. Don't, Claire said sharply. Don't you dare try to release me from this before we even know what we're actually facing. I didn't fall in love with the safest version of you, Adrian. I fell in love with the man who chose to try becoming someone better, even when it was hard, even when it cost him everything he'd built. That doesn't stop mattering to me just because consequences are catching up. Adrian's jaw tightened with emotion. He was clearly fighting to control. You could do so much better than a man facing federal charges. I could have done a lot of things differently 8 months ago, Claire said. I could have taken your $20,000 and never spoken to you again. I could have let you walk away when things got dangerous. I could have run the moment I learned who you really were. I didn't do any of those things, Adrian, because I saw something in you worth fighting for, and I still see it now. Prison or no prison, that hasn't changed. Patricia Alvarez called 2 weeks later with news that shifted everything again. Adrian, I need you to come in immediately. Both of you, actually. This concerns Claire as well. They sat in Patricia's office an hour later, tension thick in the air as she slid a document across her desk. The federal prosecutor's office has offered a deal, Patricia said. Given the extensive cooperation you provided during the Salvatore investigation, even though it wasn't officially sanctioned cooperation, and given the documented evidence of your business transition into legitimate operations. Over recent months, they're willing to consider a significantly reduced sentence in exchange for full cooperation regarding remaining criminal networks you have knowledge of. How reduced? Adrian asked, disbelief evident in his voice. 18 months with possibility of parole after 12 contingent on your testimony, helping dismantle at least 2 other organizations you have direct knowledge of. Patricia paused. This is an extraordinary offer, Adrian. Men in your position typically face decades, not months. Why would they offer this? Patricia's expression turned serious. Because your unofficial dismantling of Salvatore's operation using financial exposure instead of violence created a template federal investigators are extremely interested in replicating. They want to understand exactly how you did it. And frankly, the story of a crime boss who chose restraint and financial pressure over bloodshed, who's actively transitioning into legitimate business, who's engaged to a diner waitress instead of running from responsibility, that story matters to how this case gets prosecuted and perceived. Claire felt something like hope flutter fragile and uncertain in her chest. 18 months with parole possible after 12. That's not nothing, but it's survivable. It requires full testimony, Patricia reminded them both. Complete cooperation. Everything you know about every remaining connected operation. That's not without risk, Adrian. Testifying against former associates makes you a target for the rest of your life, regardless of what happens with your sentence. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, weighing everything. The risk, the reduced sentence, the price of finally completely closing the door on everything he'd built. I'll do it, he finally said. Whatever it takes to actually finish becoming the person I'm trying to be. The following months passed in a strange suspended rhythm of legal proceedings, testimony sessions, and stolen moments of normalcy that felt more precious now than they ever had before. Claire continued working at the diner, Rosa quietly increasing her hours and responsibilities, preparing her, though neither said it directly, for the possibility of running things more independently if Adrian's sentence became reality. The wedding happened in a small ceremony at the diner itself, closed for the afternoon, decorated simply with flowers. Rosa had insisted on arranging herself, attended by a handful of people who mattered more than any grand guest list could have. Nico stood as Adrian's best man, an unlikely choice that made perfect sense to everyone who understood what the man had witnessed over the past year. Rosa walked Claire down the makeshift aisle between diner booths, tears streaming freely, having become something like the mother Claire had lost years earlier. "You look terrified," Adrian whispered as Claire reached him at the front of the small gathering. "I am terrified," Claire whispered back. Marrying a man who might be in prison within the year is generally terrifying. Too late to back out now. Wouldn't dream of it. The ceremony was simple vows exchanged that spoke less of eternal certainty and more of committed choice of two people who understood exactly what they were walking into and chose it anyway, fully aware of every risk, every uncertainty, every hard year that might lie ahead. "I, Adrian, take you, Claire, not because you make my life easier, but because you make me want to be someone worth easier things," Adrian said, voice thick with emotion he no longer bothered hiding. "You taught me that some things aren't for sale, and in doing so you taught me what actually has value. I promise to spend whatever years I have free or otherwise earning the kind of love you've shown me since the night you refused to let me buy your silence." Claire's own vows came through tears she made no effort to hide. "I, Claire, take you, Adrian, not because you're safe or simple or easy, but because loving you taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing someone anyway, even when every practical voice tells you the timing is wrong. The risk is too high, the future too uncertain. I choose you, Adrian Romano, whoever you're still becoming for however long we get." There wasn't a dry eye among the small gathering when they kissed, sealing a promise built on 8 months of chaos, danger, and the kind of love that only exists when two people survive something together that should have torn them apart instead of binding them closer. The sentencing hearing took place 4 months after the wedding in a courtroom filled with more media attention than either of them had anticipated. The unusual story of the reformed crime boss and his diner waitress wife having captured public imagination in ways neither Adrian nor Claire had fully expected. Claire sat in the front row, Rosa beside her gripping her hand as the judge reviewed the case, weighing years of criminal activity against months of documented verifiable transition into legitimate business against extensive cooperation that had already led to 2 significant arrests within Salvatore's former network, against character testimony from unlikely sources, including several of Adrian's former captains, who spoke awkwardly but sincerely about a man who'd chosen a harder path than violence when he could have easily chosen otherwise. "Mr. Romano," the judge finally said, "this court recognizes the extraordinary nature of your cooperation and the documented evidence of genuine transformation in your business practices and personal conduct over the past year. However, the court cannot ignore 15 years of criminal enterprise that caused significant harm to numerous individuals and communities." Claire's grip on Rosa's hand tightened painfully. "This court sentences you to 18 months with eligibility for parole review after serving 12 months contingent on continued cooperation and good behavior." The relief that flooded through Claire was almost physically overwhelming, tears spilling freely as she caught Adrian's eyes across the courtroom, seeing the same overwhelming release reflected back at her. 18 months. 12 if everything went well. Not nothing, not painless, but survivable. A future they could actually plan toward, rather than an abyss of uncertain decades. Jean. The 12 months that followed tested Claire in ways she'd never anticipated, teaching her endurance she didn't know she possessed. She visited every week without fail, sitting across from Adrian in a room that smelled like industrial cleaner and quiet desperation, learning to find genuine connection even within those sterile monitored boundaries. "Rosa's talking about retirement," Claire told him during one visit 8 months into his sentence. "She wants to leave the diner to me, officially. Not just running it, but owning it." "That's incredible, Claire. What did you tell her?" "I told her I needed to think about it. It's a big responsibility, and with everything happening with you—" "Take it," Adrian said immediately. "Claire, that diner is everything you fought for since your father died. Don't let uncertainty about my situation stop you from building the life you deserve. Our life, Adrian, not just mine. Our life." He agreed, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand, the brief contact allowed during visits, feeling more precious now than any luxury he'd once tried to offer her. "But that life includes you thriving even during the parts where I can't be fully present. Take the diner, Claire. Make it yours completely." She did eventually, signing papers that transferred full ownership from Rosa's trembling but proud hands into her own, the same diner where she'd once refused an envelope of $20,000, now legally, completely hers. The parole hearing arrived on a gray morning in early spring, exactly 12 months after sentencing, and Claire sat in the waiting area feeling more nervous than she had on her actual wedding day, aware that everything they'd built toward over the past year hinged on a decision she had absolutely no control over. Nico sat beside her, having become something like family. Over the past 2 years, a constant quiet presence through everything that had happened. "He'll get it," Nico said with the confidence of a man who'd watched Adrian's transformation from the closest possible vantage point. The cooperation alone should be enough, but combined with his record of good behavior, the character testimony, everything he's built since sentencing. "You don't have to convince me, Nico. I'm terrified, regardless of the logic." "That's love for you," Nico said, with a small smile. "Never particularly logical." The wait stretched agonizingly, minutes crawling by like hours, until finally the door opened and Patricia emerged, expression carefully neutral, in a way that gave Claire absolutely no information. "Well." Claire stood immediately, heart hammering. Patricia's careful expression finally broke into a genuine smile. "Parole granted. Effective immediately pending standard processing. He'll be released within the week." Claire's legs nearly gave out beneath her relief, crashing through her system so completely, she barely registered Nico's arms catching her before she fully collapsed. "He's coming home," she whispered, tears streaming freely now. 12 months of controlled fear finally releasing all at once. He's actually coming home. Adrian walked out of the facility 6 days later into a gray, overcast morning that felt to Claire like the most beautiful sky she'd ever witnessed. She stood waiting exactly where they'd told her to stand, unable to fully process the reality of the moment, until he actually appeared, thinner than she remembered, older somehow, despite it only being a year, but unmistakably completely himself. She ran to him without any concern for dignity or composure, and he caught her fully lifting her slightly off the ground, as their embrace held 12 months of stolen phone calls and monitored visits and letters written by hand, because it felt more real than anything digital could. "You're home," Claire whispered against his neck, tears soaking into his shirt. "You're actually home." "I'm home," Adrian confirmed, voice thick with emotion he no longer bothered controlling. "And I am never ever taking this for granted again." He pulled back slightly, cupping her face in both hands, studying her like he was memorizing every detail after a year of only photographs and brief supervised visits to hold on to. "You look tired," he said softly. "I own a diner now, Adrian. Tired comes with the job description. Our diner," he corrected gently. "I want to hear everything, every single detail I missed." "You have the rest of your life to hear all of it," Claire said, smiling through tears. "Starting right now, Adem." The years that followed unfolded with the kind of quiet, hard-won happiness that neither of them had ever fully believed they deserved. Adrian threw himself into legitimate business with the same intensity he'd once brought to his criminal empire, building a network of restaurants and food distribution companies that employed dozens of people, many of them former associates who'd chosen like him to transition into lives built on something more sustainable than fear. He never touched the diner's finances, true to the promise made years earlier, though he found other ways to be present, helping with repairs, occasionally covering shifts when Claire was short-staffed, learning to make Rosa's vegetable soup recipe with a precision that would have been comical if it wasn't also deeply quietly moving to witness. "You know," Claire said one evening, watching him carefully stir a pot of soup with the same focus he'd once brought to dismantling criminal empires, "you didn't have to learn how to cook diner food. You could have just let me handle the kitchen." "I wanted to understand something," Adrian said, not looking up from his stirring. "Rosa told me once that this soup tastes like something a mother would make. I never had much of that growing up. I think some part of me is still trying to understand what that actually means." Claire felt her chest tighten with the particular ache that came whenever Adrian revealed pieces of the boy he'd once been still healing beneath the man he'd become. "Does it help?" she asked softly. "Making it yourself?" Strangely, yes. He finally looked up, something peaceful in his expression that hadn't existed years earlier when she'd first met him. "I think I'm finally starting to understand what home actually feels like. Not the buildings or the money or any of what I used to think mattered. This, exactly this." 2 years after his release, Claire found herself standing in the same diner, now expanded into the space next door, employing 3 times the staff it once did, watching Adrian help their 5-year-old daughter Sophia carefully arrange napkins into the dispensers with the same seriousness he brought to every task, no matter how small. "Daddy, why do people come here?" Sophia asked, her small hands imitating his careful movements. "Because it's a place where everyone gets treated the same no matter how much money they have," Adrian said, glancing up to catch Claire's eye across the diner, the same warmth that had first drawn her to him years earlier, still present, deepened by everything they'd survived together. "Even bad guys?" Sophia asked with the blunt curiosity only small children possess. Adrian's expression flickered with something complicated before settling into gentle honesty. "Even people who used to be bad guys if they're trying really hard to be better. Like you." Claire watched Adrian absorb the question from their daughter, watched him choose honesty over easy deflection, exactly the kind of choice that had defined their entire relationship from the very beginning. "Yes, sweetheart, exactly like me." That evening after closing, after Sophia had fallen asleep in the back booth waiting for her parents to finish their nightly ritual of counting the register together, Adrian found Claire standing at the counter exactly where she'd stood years earlier, sliding an envelope of $20,000 back toward a stranger who would go on to become the entire architecture of her adult life. "Remember this counter?" Claire asked, running her hand along the worn surface. "I remember everything about this counter," Adrian said, coming to stand beside her. "Including the exact moment you told me you charge $38 for first aid supplies, nothing more." "Best business decision I ever made," Claire said, smiling. "Best rejection I ever received," Adrian agreed, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Both of them, looking out at the quiet diner that had somehow become the center of a life neither of them could have imagined the night rain and gunfire had first brought them together. "Any regrets?" Claire asked quietly. "Looking back on everything. The war, the prison, everything we survived to get here." Adrian considered the question seriously, the way he considered everything important in his life, now weighing it with the same care he brought to every choice since the night his entire understanding of value had shattered and reformed into something entirely different. "Not one?" he finally said. "Every hard year led exactly here to this counter, to this diner, to a daughter sleeping in that booth right now, to a wife who taught me that the only currency that ever really mattered was never in my bank accounts to begin with." Claire turned in his arms, looking up at a face that had once terrified an entire city, now soft with nothing but genuine hard-earned peace. "Money can buy obedience," she said softly, echoing words that felt like they belonged to another lifetime entirely. "Power can buy silence. But love," Adrian finished, "begins only when two people are brave enough to say no to everything easy and choose each other anyway, even when every practical voice says it's impossible." Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm, indifferent as always to small miracles happening within its borders. But inside a modest Brooklyn diner, two people who had started as strangers in a rainstorm, who had survived war and prison, and every obstacle a world built on fear could throw between them, stood together in exactly the kind of quiet, ordinary happiness that no amount of money could have ever purchased. Some things were never for sale, and everything that actually mattered had always been free.